So you're thinking, okay, I'm moving in this direction of buying a house. What else do I need to know? What are other things? Well, we wanted to prepare some questions for you to answer before buying, because we think to be an informed buyer, not just in this market, but in any market, you ought to really understand the answer to these questions. The first one, Brian, that we talked about, and we've said this over and over and over again, is how long is your time horizon? When it comes to buying real estate, when it comes to buying a home, it is not a short-term decision, because real estate markets don't move in the short term. When you buy a house, we really want you to be in there for 5, 7, 10 years, so that it's not as important what the price you paid was if you give it enough time to cover, okay, maybe I overpaid a little bit, maybe that's not as big of a deal because you have a long enough timeline.
Yeah, and by the way, if you're listening to this on the podcast side of things, or even watching it, you do not have to write down these questions. We're in a second, we're going to tell you about a free deliverable we've created so you can actually, you yourself, go download from our resource pages, free deliverable on all the questions you should ask yourself. So we'll share that in a second. But I wanted to just free everybody up so you can actually listen to the points, learn, seep it in so that you understand is that Bo is exactly right. Time is one of the biggest factors you've got to consider. Like I said, I understand if you're moving, relocating to an area, sometimes you have no choice. I bullied Bo into buying his first house or second house because of they had a growing family, and I was like, man, get in there. I feel like I bullied Rebe into her first home to a degree, because it lined up with the family need. But others, you might need to wait. But overall, still 7 to 10 years. I mean, because we always say in our deliverables 5 to 7 years, but I will tell you, in this type of a market where there's uncertainty on the pricing, are you getting a good value for the house, or is it going to adjust down even further? The longer you can go out on how long you can commit to being in this property and setting roots, the easier it mitigates the variation of the market cycle. So pay attention. That's the reason it's question number one. How long is your time horizon on this?
Frankly, we think that's the most important question. When it comes to buying real estate, that's the most important question. Well, the second question, this is not surprising, and Brian, you talked a lot about this in show prep and as we've been developing this content. The question you have to answer is, what is we used your word, we didn't even change it. What's the sizzle of your location? What on earth does that mean, Brian? Why does the sizzle of the location matter?
I think it's so interesting that we just showed at the beginning of the show two very different perspectives. One was saying biggest collapse in real estate of our lifetime. And then we had another commentary who said, hey, best time because we have low supply. You're not going to see the drop in the housing prices. How you can be in completely different polar, but it's hard to put this blanket over the entire country because what do you hear about real estate? Location, location, location. There are going to be parts of the country where migration patterns, where industry moving into the area, it creates sizzle. There's a reason I use that word is because there's so many people moving to that area. It's crazy to think you're going to have the same reduction in value there that you might have in other areas where people are moving. Once again, a perfect experience share. I'm from South Atlanta. You're from South Atlanta. South Atlanta real estate values after the Great Recession got crushed. The area we now live in this Franklin, Tennessee, Nashville area, the downturn of 2008 through the 2010 to 11, because that was that U-shaped period, was about the houses lost like 10, 11%.
Very different than South Side
Meanwhile,
of Atlanta.
South Atlanta, I kid you not, 50 to 60% reduction in value. So it's you have to pay attention to the sizzle and what is going on in the area because that's a big important thing. Don't get caught up in the emotion because that's the biggest problem with real estate. And that's why when my wife wants to go look at stuff, I'm like, as soon as you start looking, the idea will grow that you need to make a decision. Keep it analytical, but you've got to do the work on sizzle. When we were considering relocating to this area, and we had big needs on schools because I needed a special school for my autistic daughter, but I also needed a good public school system for my oldest daughter. We wanted good opportunity from a socioeconomic situation to have a wealth management firm. We did the research to know just how much sizzle was in this area before we actually pulled the trigger on it.
And not all areas, not all locations have the same amount of sizzle. So if you are a buyer, there's some things you want to pay attention to. Pay attention to population trends. How many folks are moving into the area or out of the area? How many businesses are coming to the area? What do the available job opportunities look like? How much time are houses in that area spending on the market? That's a huge indicator into how frothy or not frothy the real estate prices may be. If you can educate yourself around that specific sizzle, it'll help you make decisions. So, Brian, what if the area you're looking at is super, super hot, and because of that, the prices are starting to get high? Should we start expanding our search out? Like, okay, I know I want to be in a suburb of Nashville, but maybe the Franklin area is really, really expensive. Should I think about extending that out? Is that a prudent decision if I know I'm someone looking for a housing solution this year?
Once again, it comes back to your why, because I love for you guys to learn from my mistakes and the fact that I moved back to the South Atlanta after college and everything because I knew it was comfortable for me. I had family down there. I knew the area. I thought when I started my first business down there that everybody who I went to high school, all their parents and everybody else would remember, oh, Brian, he was a smart guy. But it doesn't work that way. I was very short-sighted in thinking about what is this area, what's the opportunities here, what's going to happen around here. And I chose, plus in South Atlanta, you could get, I'll just say it was a McMansion for not much money.
Not at all.
So I was like, man, this is a no-brainer because if I move here, I can get a 3,500, 3,700 square foot house with a basement and a nice community.
Very different.
If I look in North Atlanta, I'm going to be able to buy an 1,800 square foot or maybe 2,200 square foot home, smaller piece of property. But I'm telling you, be careful. Sometimes this is back to the location. I don't want you spending 45 minutes a day each way. So essentially an hour and a half commuting, because if you look at happiness indicators, commuting time is one of the biggest drivers of unhappiness. So don't, make a short time decision because you're thinking about, I can buy this big old house for this little bit of money, and not think about how much time, how much of your life you're going to give to sitting in that car. Now, as a content creator, I love you long commuters because it's perfect for downloading our show and the podcast and listening. But from a happiness standpoint, that's more important to me than even the consumption of our content. Think about that. At least give it some consideration. Now, look, I know, like Avery was talking about one of her college professors, and she on purpose lives a good bit outside of Nashville because she has horses. Sure. She has like all this land.
Makes sense for the stuff she values.
There are people that, yes, it still might make sense to pull the trigger and actually do it, but measure twice, cut once, and make sure you're taking into account a full 360 of what your life's demands are versus just getting excited. I can get this big old house for this a lot cheaper than it is over here. There's a reason typically why there's a big deal there.
So what I'm hearing you say is when it comes to making real estate decisions, I don't need to let the dollars and cents be the only thing that goes into my consideration, but I also don't need to let the touchy-feely happy stuff only be. It's got to be a marriage of those two things to make sure that I'm appropriately analyzing the sizzle in my location. So that's question number 2. Question number 3 that we think is so important to ask is, what is your family situation? Now, this one is one right now. I am a family of 5, and it is very, very different than I was Bo Hansen single family of 1. And the housing needs associated with that are very, very different. And the things that I value are very, very different. So do you believe that for the next 5, 7, 10 years, your family situation, whether you're married, whether you have children, how many children you have, whether you're going to be an empty nester, all of those kinds of things need to come into consideration, because you don't want to buy a house for what makes sense today and find out that a short 12, 18, 24 months from now, holy cow, this house was way too small. Or holy cow, we built way too big of a house and now the kids are off at college and we don't even see each other. We don't even use half of the rooms. Make sure you understand you have a clear vision on what the family situation is going to look like for the next 5, 7, 10 years.
Well, we've spent a lot of time talking about families, but I'll tell you, it's not just families. I have a client, and I feel like I'm half marital counselor, and the fact that when we talk about what typically comes up at least once a year, and this has been a client for over a decade now, is he was single when he bought his house. Mm-hmm. He's now married. It's a couple that this was, they're a little bit older as they got married. She brings up that she hates the house. Oof. Every time, but he's pretty good with money and he doesn't want to move just for the sake of
the house is
moving
fine.
so she can, so it's just a weird, so I would tell you family situations, not just kids. It could be, is your future spouse. I mean, if you're, going to like this property, because there's all kind of things that go into your family situation. I actually struggled with was, should this be the second question or third question? Because it really, this is what's going to drive both the time horizon. This is what's going to drive your decision in a lot of ways, is what's your actual personal family situation, even and future family situation, so you don't mess this up.